why it matters that we had a successful Boeing Starliner docking to the International Space Station today at the same time that we had a successful SpaceX Starship fourth test happen today. These are two different vehicles, two different purposes, but it actually sort of goes together, and I'm going to explain why. I'm Lara Forsick. I'm the executive director of space consulting firm Astrolytical. I've been in the space industry for 20 years, and I am super excited about all the things going on, as I'm sure you are if you're watching this. The thing with the test flights today is that they were so coincidental. Starliner super delayed by years. It's been delayed. Starship, yes, delayed, but only delayed by a little bit, a few months. We had actually pretty quick succession between the test flight of 3 and 4, but the earlier test flights were so delayed. So if the earlier test flights had not been so delayed, then I think the fourth test flight obviously would have happened sooner. So it's sort of just coincidence that we had a phenomenal space week going on. We had Starliner launch yesterday, docked to the International Space Station today, and Starship launching to space once again today and proving it can re-enter. And the reason why these two sort of go together, despite the coincidence, even though they're very different vehicles, operated by different commercial companies with different purposes, and they're both test flights. One had people on board, so one was a bit more mature than the other one, quite a bit more mature than the other one, but the other one is making faster progress. So there's a lot to contrast here, but I also want to talk about how they're complementary. And this is a question that was actually posed to me by an interview I just did with I've done a series of interviews of the past 2 days, and mainly it was like Starliner by itself or Spaceship by itself, but the interview I just did was the two of them together, comparing the two happenings that are going on in spaceflight right now. And I thought that was an interesting comparison because it really truly is coincidence that these are happening at the same time, but they represent two different domains of progress where we have, okay, so let's back up actually. Let's go back 10 years. I don't know how many of you watching this have been around the space sector 10 years ago, maybe a lot of you, and you might remember that we did not have Falcon 9 landing. We didn't have Falcon 9 happening very much at all. So SpaceX was not yet proving itself. It was still in that who's this newcomer? What are they doing? They're getting, some Falcon 9s happening. There was a pretty bad blow up of a Falcon 9. When was that? A little more than a decade ago. So they were still in the process of proving themselves. And then Starliner wasn't even a concept yet. Starship was a concept, but not by that name. And so it's one of these things where we've progressed so much in the past decade. If you just take a step back and see where we were. I mean, I was just joking to the journalist I was on the call with, ULA was dominant 10 years ago. United Launch Alliance was the main U.S. launch provider back about a decade ago, with SpaceX really coming up and coming, but not the dominant force that it is today, where ULA is barely launching, unfortunately, as it transitions out its Atlas and Delta programs and goes more towards Vulcan. And now, of course, we have Falcon 9 launching every few days. It's amazing. And that just wasn't the case a decade ago. So if you think back to when NASA decided to create the Commercial Crew Program, kind of a one step beyond the commercial cargo program that it had, delivering cargo to the International Space Station with firm fixed price contracts to commercial entities. And this was one step further. This was saying not just governments can take astronauts to space. We believe that commercial companies can take astronauts to space, and naturally people were thinking that Boeing was going to do that because of Boeing's long history. And so naturally people thought, of course Boeing's going to get astronauts to space. We trust Boeing, but can we trust SpaceX? And then, of course, SpaceX beats them by 4 years. So that's kind of impressive. That we now have the ability to launch 2 American vehicles to the International Space Station, to low Earth orbit. What we have here is the beginnings of that industry, where it's not just SpaceX, Dragon, launching to the International Space Station, launching, to free fly around low Earth orbit, launching, hopefully, to future space stations. We actually are now seeing the possibility of Starliner. And of course, we've got other ones in the works as well, Dream Chaser being one of them. I don't really know the details about New Glenn, but that one is very likely to launch humans eventually to low Earth orbit. And what other ones? What am I missing? But at least those 4 American vehicles that can launch crew to orbit. It's just phenomenal. It really is. So you got that happening today. And It's very delayed, but it is happening. And then you have Starship, which just blows my mind. It is one of those things that looks science fiction, and it's real, right? It's oh my gosh. Like, so we had that video going pretty much the whole time, and it just didn't even look real, but it was, and that's what made it so even more spectacular than it would have been if we'd been told about it. But we got to see it live with our own eyes, and that's just amazing to me. I went on record a couple days ago on camera here and predicted that that Starship would be a partial success, that it would get further than the test flight that previously occurred back in March, but it would not be 100% successful, and it surpassed my expectations. Yes, it was not 100% successful, but it was pretty close. They lost an engine. I think they lost some tiles. Something was going on with the disintegration of the ship part toward the end as it was doing a re-entry through the atmosphere. And honestly, I've been so busy with appointments and interviews and stuff, I haven't really looked into super details after the the live stream ended. So I don't know if they've released any additional information about how it survived, what state it was in when it hit the ocean. But super impressive. Oh my gosh, impressive. So it surpassed my expectations, not 100% success, but pretty darn close, which tells me, and this is not official, but it does tell me that the FAA is probably not going to require a mishap investigation. And if they don't require a mishap investigation, then they can potentially award SpaceX a license to do a 5th test flight pretty quickly. And so what we're seeing here is a whole new domain of spaceflight. That's not just LEO, right? Not just taking crew of four members, 2 members, however many astronauts on board to the International Space Station or to a future space station. We are seeing a capability increase beyond what we've ever seen before, where it could potentially take a whole lot more crew and a whole lot more cargo to not just LEO, not just low Earth orbit, but to the moon, to Mars, to wherever it is they want to send it. Still have a lot of steps, right? They still have to demonstrate a lot of things like landing back on land, being caught by the tower, the fuel propellant transfer, so many other things that need to be tested. But that's what's going on here, is that we have the maturation of one industry where previously it was only governments launching astronauts to LEO, and now we have 2 American commercial companies launching astronauts to LEO. And we have the revolution, you could say the evolution of human spaceflight with Starship, where it's a completely different ballgame. It changes everything. It really does. Now I have to be careful when I say things like that, because no one can predict the future, and we really don't know what the cadence is going to be, what its capabilities are going to be. Like, we don't know what the price point is, so we don't actually know how much Starship is going to change things. But guaranteed, it's going to change things. It's already changing things. We already see the space industry responding to the capabilities of Starship in terms of like even whole companies, startups being created around the concept of being in Starship. And that to me is just proof that we're entering a whole new era here of what we are capable of doing. And so comparing and contrasting the two, even though they're so very different, with like apples and oranges comparison, just coincident that they're happening at the same time here, it's still a really straight comparison. Now, another way to look at this, which the journalist asked me about, she's like, what about the mentality of testing, right? So we have SpaceX that is rapidly iterating is what I mean to say, rapidly iterating its test flights, where it launches as quickly as it can, as quickly as it gets permissions to launch, with the intention of breaking something, with the intention of breaking a lot of things and getting the data. The payload is the data. They kept saying during the live stream over and over and over on today's Starship test flight. Whereas you have the more traditional approach, the NASA approach, the prime contractor approach, arguably what Boeing was trying to do, although they still kind of messed up a bunch, which was take it slow, take it steady, test as much as you can on the ground. When it finally happens that you launch, you want everything to be perfect. That's sort of the ULA mentality that we saw with the Vulcan launch earlier this year, which was flawless, right? That was a perfect launch that ULA did earlier this year, launching its first flight of Vulcan. And that is sort of what we expect to see with Boeing, but Boeing had a lot of incidences with unforeseen problems with Starliner. So you can't really say that they actually had that flawless launch. They didn't. And even today, we saw some little hiccups going on as they were approaching International Space Station to dock. But it is a different mentality, completely different. One is more traditional. And, when you do have people on board, it does change the equation. You do have to be very cautious and careful and slow when you have people on board your capsule, when lives are at stake. But even before then, even with the uncrewed test flights of Starliner, you did not see that rapid approach to testing. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, so I just won't comment any further. But it is an interesting contrast, right? And I think history will prove out which one is better for some circumstances and not for others. I think it probably just depends. I can't say black or white, what one is better than the other, but one is certainly working for SpaceX, that's for sure. I'm excited. I hope you all are excited. Let me know your favorite parts of today.